Yo, so guys, welcome back to another video. Firstly, I just want to apologise for this absolute mess on my face. I'm just warning you, even though I'm wearing toothpaste on my spots, you're going to be thanking me because they are disgusting and they are huge and I am embarrassed with everything to do with myself right now. But yeah, it's a mess under the under the toothpaste. So yeah, that's just me sort of explaining why I look like an absolute mess right now, because I am. And I feel like I'm catching a bit of a cold, I'm not going to lie. Either moving stuff has just been stressful, and I just sort of, like when you're sort of doing a lot of doing a lot of things mentally, just a bit exhausted, you sometimes feel a bit unwell. Either that, or I am actually catching a cold. But yeah, so if I do get worse over the coming days, I apologise for that. I will be back again. I don't know, maybe I'll be a lot better tomorrow, but yeah, that's that really. But this is an interesting one. This is probably going to cause a big stir in the comments, but I enjoy these. I enjoy this channel a lot. Firstly, this channel is really interesting. What if I can't actually say his name? What if I can't say his name? But I've done reactions to this channel before, and the videos are really interesting. And this one sparks my interest again. And the video is what if civil war broke out between Republicans and Democrats? And this is kind of a relevant video now, probably more relevant a few weeks back, but it's still one of those videos that it is kind of like relevant in a sense, even though this video was actually made 3.5 years ago. But yeah, again, I like the channel. He seems to speak like with sort of like actual knowledge. He seems to actually know what he's talking about when he does sort of these types of videos. So although I still take these sorts of videos with a pinch of salt, it's still kind of interesting to see people's views and stuff. And it is an interesting topic again, like if a civil war broke out, because the sort of like the divide is ridiculous. Like, I don't get involved in politics. I'm not really a fan of politics, honestly. What's extremes on both sides, I just don't really pay attention to. I mean, you obviously see things on Twitter and like certain things here and there, but like, yeah, politics isn't for me. But it is still interesting to see sort of the landscape, and it's kind of similar in the UK, just not. Actually, it's the case in the UK, like it's divided, but this in the US is like times 10, times 100, like how divided it actually is. But yeah, let's just get into this one and see what this video has to talk about, really. But yeah, let's just check this out. Quick shout out to my Instagram and my Twitter. Closing in on 4K on my Instagram. I assure you, I don't look like this much of a mess on my Instagram pictures. And same for my Patreon. Links in the description for that. I got a lot of Patreon exclusive reactions on there. And yeah, support on Eve is really appreciated. Same for the channel. The support has been crazy, like for the last few months, and I thought it was going to slow down. And although it's slowed down to a certain extent, it's still going absolutely crazy, and I'm loving every second of it. But let's get into this one. Let's check this out. This is a long ass intro.
I don't think I'm the first person to comment that America today
His mic seems weird. Oh, it's probably because it's quite old, isn't it? His mic seems really like...
is a nation politically divided, the most so in the last 100 years. And if you're anything like me, you're probably tired of hearing people talk about how awful the political climate is. But I waited to release this video far after the election, so not to create a comment section of unimaginable horrors when tempers were running high earlier. Yet this division brings up the question, what if the unimaginable was to occur? What if civil war did break out between the Republicans and Democrats? How would America and the world as a whole change? That is the question of this video. Firstly, I don't know if war will break out, but that's not the point of this video. I won't give any opinion on the subject, and I'll simply say that this video is to see what if that were to happen, not judging its plausibility.
Okay.
Also, it doesn't matter how the war starts. I'm just going to say that it does, and the battle lines are similar to the last few elections. I understand that for the outsiders that make up 59% of my audience, the American political system can get complicated and get simplified to a ridiculous level abroad.
But it is kind of crazy, like... American politics is like, obviously it's for the US, but like you don't see like how UK politics or other countries' politics sort of take the world by storm in a sense, or like take the media world by storm. But when it comes to the US politics and like the elections and all that kind of stuff, your Twitter feed will just be full of it, even if you aren't like following anything related to it, or like it's all over the news and all this kind of stuff. So either I don't know the perspective from people from the US seeing the UK politics, but I assume things that happen in the UK don't even get seen in the US, but vice versa, it's in your face when it happens, and it obviously goes to show like the influence of the politics, not just in the US, around the world, because it will affect the world, whatever party is elected or whatever president's elected. I don't know why I even got to that, but I guess him saying like a lot of his audience aren't actually from the US, it still does kind of affect them in a sense, and it is interesting as well, like to learn about.
The two parties. The party who currently has the president, the Republicans, have the symbol of the elephant. They tend to be a coalition of nationalists, libertarians, and social conservatives. Their opponents
Okay.
in the party of the previous president.
I'll be 100% honest. I don't really know all the terminologies, so I'm hearing some words he's saying, and it's just sort of mumbo jumbo in my ear. I'm just gonna be honest.
Are the Democrats. The Democratic symbol is the donkey, and they tend to be a coalition of ethnic minorities, social progressives, and advocates for big government. The Republicans dominate rural regions, the Democrats in cities, and suburbs
Okay.
tend to be fair game. A Finnish comedy show once described it as the elephant cowboys against the hippie donkeys, and I think that's not an unfair description. Card-carrying Democrats are 31% of the population, while card-carrying Republicans are 28%. However,
Oh, so it
they
is
tend to in
really split.
actuality be far closer because independents tend to vote Republican more than Democrat. I know people are going to claim I'm biased, but I took a political compass test, and this is where I am. Yes, I tilt a little bit libertarian right, but I'm still dead center, and so I feel like I can judge this fairly objectively. I have Republican and Democrat friends, and I don't dislike either party.
Setting the stage.
This is a state map of the latest election and the election before it. These maps tend to be really misleading on how an actual civil war would play out, since they lump all voters in a single state into a single camp. The mistake most
I
modern
mean, you look at
American civil
this, and you sort of think a lot more states are like it, as it looks. Maybe it's just because the states are bigger, but a lot more states seem to be Republican. No, sorry. Oh, wait, Republican. Yeah, Republican. But I'm guessing these states are a lot less sort of like inhabited, so there's less people other than Texas, of course. But like California, New York, they're very sort of highly populated states. But when you look at this graph alone, it does sort of make you think, okay, so it's a lot more red than blue. But then obviously the amount of people who live in each state, then you sort of
war
realise.
scenarios have is that they take this map seriously. For comparison, as you can see when you look at the county level, it's a completely different picture. This is in actuality a far more accurate picture of how a war would play out.
Oh
I
shit!
can already hear people typing angrily about how in the other American Civil War, entire states.
Can I just look at this a second, bro? I mean, this makes it look even crazier, like even more one-sided in a crazy sense. He's right when he says sort of like the cities are more like lean towards a certain party and the sort of rural areas lean to other parties. Like you see, like California, all the sort of cities or counties on the coast where the cities are a lot more blue dominated, and then like the sort of rural areas are a lot more red dominated. But again, you can see this and it makes you think, wow, it's very one-sided. But then the more populated places have like different colours, kind of thing.
I can already hear people typing angrily about how in the other American Civil War, entire states fought in a single grouping, so why not in this one? The reasons are twofold. The first of which, state pride was a far greater force in those days, with people not actually thinking of the US as a united nation, instead of as a collection of states that work together. Many people have made the claim that state identity was actually more important in the Civil War than national identity. Secondly, the division in the last Civil War is mainly climactic, with the areas that had a climate warm enough to grow crops that needed slaves rebelling, and the states that were too cold to support said crops remaining loyal. This meant that only a couple states were really split, being Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Maryland, and Virginia. Today, split states are the norm. Almost every
Wow.
state is a countryside that votes Republican and a city that votes Democrat. The norm is that when the countryside can outvote the city, the Republicans win, and vice versa for the Democrats. Let me give you an example. Nevada, a swing state in which the Democrat city of Las Vegas in the southern tip won Hillary the latest election, while the entire rest of the state is Republican. Can we expect the Republicans to fight for the Democrats just because one city voted Democrat? This is demonstrative of many American states, be it
That's kinda
Pennsylvania,
crazy.
Illinois, Oregon, Tennessee, Florida, etc. When it comes to civil war after land control, the most important variable is the military. Whatever side the military sides.
I don't know why this is going to come across as really stupid, and this isn't just for US politics, this is for politics around the world. Because I think it works the same in the UK, like you have certain territories or counties that will sort of vote and it will all add up. But certain counties will have a high population than others. Why isn't it just, I don't know, again, please let me know in the comments, why isn't it just the amount of people who vote for one party and the other, and it's not like sort of per county or per state? Because I feel like that would make more sense, but again, I don't really know. Because if that would be the case, would it be a lot sort of further apart, or would it be just as close? Maybe it would. I don't know though, because they sort of vote for each county and they take each county's sort of higher voted party, etc. I don't know. I'm getting into things I'm not too familiar with, so I'm going to probably come across as very, very, very
With the side that
stupid.
tends to win the Civil War simply because the military's equipment and training proves decisive in the war. In enlisted men, Republicans have around 36%, while Democrats have around 21%. This may not
Okay.
seem like an enormous divide, but when you keep in mind how this compares to the general population, you see the enormous tilt. Meanwhile, libertarians make up between 5 to 10% of the military, and libertarians tend to be allies with the Republicans, making the division even
Oh,
larger. While
man.
when you look at officers, or the men who can lead and train troops, you see that it's even more Republican, with only 3% identifying as liberals. This is the county map of the very early stages of the war. If you remove isolated patches smaller than 3 counties, I find it unlikely that single counties surrounded by enemies would fight the clearly impossible battle. As you can see, the Republicans control most of the country, the Democrats surviving in patches, there being 5 substantial ones. In the Northeast, California, the Pacific Northwest, the Southern Rockies, and parts of the South. People tend to think of the South as insanely Republican, but there are actually Democratic.
Yeah, the most southern point in the US, I mean, let's just forget about Florida, just for my point, is actually isn't red, which is kind of confusing to me because I would have thought the whole of Texas would be. I'm guessing maybe this is because this may be like a highly sort of Mexican American sort of area, because I know like there's a lot of Mexican culture in Texas, and maybe some of the Mexican Americans will sort of vote for different, like you said, minorities and stuff. Even though in Texas they're probably not minorities, but I guess that's the case with that. But still, even other states around here,
Parts of the
I
South,
would not have guessed
namely
that.
majority black areas.
But then up sort of north, it's also really red dominated, which is surprising. I thought this would be a lot more blue around here.
This disunity would give the Republicans yet another advantage, with them being able to coordinate as a single unit based around likely St. Louis, with all the center of the country being able to pool strength together. The Democrats, meanwhile, would be isolated into many different islands, being separated by hundreds or even thousands of miles from each other. Just before we start, a brief side note. It's been
Fuck. He just got so quiet.
70 years we've had a major war between two industrialized nations, and technology has changed quite a bit since then, with new technologies like cyber warfare, mechanized infantry, and satellites. This means that it's kind of hard to predict the mechanics of a future war, just because the world's changed so much and we have very little things to look back on. It's kind of like someone from the Napoleonic Wars trying to predict the American Civil War or World War One, with technology like the machine gun, the tank, or rapid-firing rifles. And so just expect the mechanics of this future war to be different from how you would expect it to be.
The war.
At the beginning of the war, both sides would gear up into total war mode and amass large armies. Like the previous American Civil War, this would take some time.
The audio in this video is up and down, so I apologise if your ears are bursting. I can't really control it. Some points are low, some points are high. That's my bad, but yeah, we just have to live
And
with it, I
skirmishes
guess.
would take place as they would happen. The Republicans having more of the military, and thus more men capable of training an army more quickly, and having more material to start with, simply because they would have more land. This would mean that at the beginning of the war, the Republicans would be able to amass an army faster, and thus go on the offensive earlier, while the Democrats would still be gathering their act together. The Republicans would use their offensive energies to first wipe out the Democratic strongholds in the center of the country. The Democrat parts of the South tend to be poor and easily divisible, so wouldn't be able to offer much resistance against the united Republican forces. You might get a guerrilla campaign in this region during the rest of the war, but nothing large enough to stop or even hinder the Republican goals. This would happen at roughly the same time as the Republican destruction of the New Mexico-Colorado stronghold. New Mexico would have the same issue as the Democratic South, being surrounded, poor, and lightly settled. The Democrats in Colorado, being surrounded and unable to achieve aid from the other strongholds, would be pressed back into Denver, losing the countryside. Large Democratic cities surrounded by Republicans like Denver, Chicago, Minneapolis, and Detroit create an issue. In most civil wars, these cities would keep fighting in long and protracted sieges, knowing that if they gave up, they'd be slaughtered and pillaged by the enemies. So why not keep starving and fighting if it at least gave you a chance of survival? However, America has not yet reached this level of political polarization and nastiness in which Republicans would rape, pillage, and slaughter the population of Chicago for simply being Democrat. No
What
matter
the
what Southern
fuck?
revisionists tell you, the first American Civil War wasn't that bad for civilians. This wouldn't have to happen either for there to be a civil war. So in this timeline, let's assume things don't get that nasty, and thus Democratic cities can surrender to Republican besiegers with the knowledge they won't get slaughtered, thus making it a better choice than a long protracted siege with starvation and death. This would give Democratic cities like Chicago, Denver, Minneapolis, and Detroit into Republican hands. While the Republicans would be destroying the Democrats in the interior of the country, the Democrats would be shoring up their defenses in their coastal regions. In the east, the Democrats would conquer the Delmarva Peninsula, thus connecting Washington Democrats with Philadelphia, as well as conquering the lightly settled Republican northern New England. The North Carolina Democrats would likely fortify their mountains, waiting for the inevitable Republican attack. In the west, the Democrats would likely connect Seattle with Portland to unite the Pacific Northwest. The California Democrats would likely push into the Imperial Valley as well. The distance would likely be too great for the Democrat Army to connect the Pacific Northwest region with California, since the Democrat Army would still be training and developing their projection abilities. There would be several flashpoints or theaters at this part of the war. In the east, Virginia would be one, which, if the Democrats would win, would connect North Carolina with Washington and Delmarva, thus uniting the Democratic East. Another would be upstate New York, which the Democrats would likely try to conquer, so to re-seize the traditional Democratic cities.
You're looking at this point, and it's looking the Republican Party is winning by a landslide at this point. But again, these are the very highly populated areas, I guess. I mean, my guess would have been from the after the stats that you said, like how the militaries, there's more like Republican people who vote for Republican parties and all this different kind of stuff. They would have been my guess, but well, I mean, you look at this map and it's just so dominated, other than the coast.
Of Syracuse and Buffalo, which could create a platform to reinvade the upper Midwest. And also in the west, there would be the Imperial Valley, which creates an enormous amount of food and is a flat valley right next to the probable Democratic Californian capital of San Francisco. Also, Oregon and Northern California, which, if the Democrats would win, would connect the Pacific Northwest with California, thus uniting the Democrat West Coast. It's impossible for me to predict individual tactics and battles, but in general I think the Republicans would over time gain the upper hand in every theater, and I'll explain why next. Firstly, the creation of total war between the two factions would force industry to come back to America in a big way to make all the weapons. The two regions that would reindustrialize the fastest would be the Rust Belt, which used to be the industrial heart of America, and so would have the institutions and facilities for the return of industry. The second would be the American South, which is the least regulation and the cheapest wages. Both of these areas would mainly be controlled by the Republicans, giving the Republicans a market advantage industrially. Training, the Republicans being able to mobilize faster and go on the offensive faster, thus forcing the Democrats to churn out armies to protect their holdings. These armies would be horribly rushed, not having proper training or materiel. Also, more pre-war officers would give the Republicans more experience, likely meaning they'd make better tactical decisions. Thirdly, population and resources. The Republicans controlling the entire center of the country would simply have more men to throw at the Democrats. Also, almost all of the U.S.'s food, resources, and oil-producing regions would be in Republican hands. The Democratic strongholds would be dependent upon trade with foreign nations for survival and resources. With the Navy likely turning for the most part Republican, assuming that the Democrats likely have to put large parts of their resources into building a Navy to simply keep connections with the rest of the world going for supplies, which connects to the next part.
For an interlude.
The U.S. being the most powerful nation on Earth means that if it splits into civil war, it's everyone's problem. Countries would intervene in the side that would be in their interest. The Republicans tend to advocate an aggressive foreign policy, so countries that would benefit from this would give the Republicans aid. These countries would also want the war to end as fast as possible, so a strong U.S. could return to being a strong player, thus would support the dominant side, the Republicans. These would be countries like Japan, Korea, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Eastern Europe. The Democrats have a more popular opinion around the world, especially in Western Europe. Western Europe would likely send aid of some sort to the Eastern Democrats. However, Western Europe has very little military power, with their militaries being directly dependent upon the United States. This wouldn't amount to much. The EU might collapse in the strain of Eastern Europe supporting the Republicans, while the West supporting the Democrats.
America, please don't have a civil war. I'm on my knees. Please. We'd all be fucked.
The Chinese and Russians, being America's main rivals, would want the Civil War to go on for as long as possible, so they could have a free hand across the world, while the U.S. would be weak internationally. Thus, they would prop up the losing side, the Democrats, with aid to simply extend the war. They would use the U.S.'s lapse from power to conquer the Baltics and Taiwan, respectively. People often say in forums on this subject that Mexico and Canada would side with the Democrats since they share vaguely similar agendas. This is ridiculous. Firstly, because Canada only exists because the US is fine with it. Canada is 10% of the US's population and is dependent upon its military and economy, so Canada needs to get along with whoever is in power in the US, thus they would not want to disturb the Civil War for fear of conquest. They would know that if they sided with the Democrats, the vast majority of their country would be conquered in a matter of weeks, if not days, by the Republicans.
God damn.
No offense, but I'm not sure why some people take Mexico seriously as a military power compared to the US. For a power comparison, Mexico's total GDP is roughly the same as just the US state of Florida. The Mexican military can't even defeat gangs in its own nation, let alone invade the most powerful nation on Earth. The US's military spending is 68 times that of Mexico, and the US
times.
Armies is the number one in the world, while the Mexican is only the 28th.
The end of the war.
I'm pretty sure it's pretty clear who's going to win the war at this stage of the video. The Republicans would now go on focusing their energies in each of the remaining Democrat coasts, destroying them in isolation one by one, likely starting with the smallest one, being the Pacific Northwest. Another Republican advantage is that the Democrats are strung out in long control lines that can be cut easily. For example, if the Republicans conquer northern New Jersey or Havre de Grace in northern Maryland, they would split the Democrat Eastern forces in three, thus continually weakening the pooling of forces. We would likely see this principle if the Republicans would split the Democrats into smaller and smaller regions. The war would likely end nastily with the surviving Democrat coastal cities fighting on in urban warfare, continually shoving their enormous populations into the breach with little training and materiel, simply keep going, propped up by the Russians and Chinese. The Republicans would win this war of attrition, but with terrible cost. I'd be surprised if New York, Boston, or San Francisco would come out of this war half the cities they are now. The war's over. The Republicans won in summary because they were able to control most of the country and mobilize a better army faster. Did this result surprise you? How do you think this future...
It didn't surprise me after learning the stats, that's for sure. Once I started seeing like the percentages of like who's Republican or who's conservative, I'm so bad with my terminology. But like yeah, I mean, and so Republican and Democratic. But yeah, after seeing the stats, it kind of became obvious, and then you sort of saw the spread of who's in which party, and you just it sort of came to mind that the Republicans would win. Before I got into this video, I had no clue, to be honest. But then after seeing it, it does make sense. Again, something I hope doesn't happen, and I don't think it will ever happen. But it was like things got close again. Maybe not to a civil war, but a boiling point at least. Like, there's definitely tensions there, to say the least. And who knows what the next few years will bring. I mean, if this is anything to go by, maybe there is a possibility of this, but I hope not, for the sake of the world and for the sake of people from the US, because, yeah, it wouldn't be good for the world at all.
And the world would develop. I'll let you battle out those questions in the comments. What if Altist? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please comment.
What if Altist? That's how you say it. I was like, how do you say his name? But again, this is one of those videos that I take with a bit of a pinch of salt, but it's still interesting to see this kind of stuff. 2020, write that down. This is now suddenly a very current question. Who would win in a war between Democrats and Republicans? Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. He's spitting, bro. He's literally spitting. If I missed it, then correct me. But you forgot to mention that 45% of all firearms in the US are owned by Republicans, with only 60% of the hands of Democrats and 32% of independents. The United States falls into guerrilla warfare between multiple political factions. China and Russia, it's free real estate. I've been there before. You know, the founding fathers never wanted political parties. Who's here before the new American Civil War? You definitely know people came to this video because of things that were going on in like around the summertime. The EU looks intensively waiting for more war refugees. If this would happen, I would believe America's enemies, China, Russia, and others would come in for the kill. Honestly, that's a really good point. Sticks and bite locks may break my bones, but hollow points expand on impact. It's a good point. Like, I can't even think. Places like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, like other places like that. He's right when he says like they would benefit more, or the comments are right when it says they'd benefit more. Like not the US, not other countries, but them, because like if that ever happened, they would be able to take advantage of it. If there was a proper civil war, and I don't really think there ever will be. I don't have wood. Where can I actually touch wood? I can assure you, my cupboard is wood. I can't really show you, but I just touched wood. But yeah, again, it's an interesting video to say the least, and I had a few suggestions for it, and I thought, why not? Let's just check this out. But hopefully you guys enjoy this one. What are your thoughts on this? And yeah, until next time, like, subscribe, peace.